At AIA Australia, we're making healthy living easier by incentivising your clients with rewards, like discounts on their gym memberships, eligible flights, and insurance premiums with AIA Vitality. It's no wonder that we've reduced client lapse rates by 50% and helped grow client engagement. To find out more, contact your AIA CDM today.
Fair enough.
All right, guys. Hey, listen, thanks so much for joining this week's XY Live. As always, we will encourage you to ask as many questions as possible, so we will be monitoring those as the session goes through. This week, we've got Executive Director of Treysta Financial Life Management, Mark Nagle, to join us. Mark's got many, I suppose, polarizing opinions around the industry, being a little bit more honest with itself, I guess, as it looks into the mirror, creating stronger business models that create really fantastic value propositions to clients. Mark's now, I suppose, pretty well renowned talking at a whole bunch of industry circuits. He's a pretty consistent contributor in media, press, and the like. And with that, Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you all to those who've taken some time out to join us.
So I think, Mark, I might sort of start by asking I guess why we've got the topic today, leaving value on the table, and perhaps ask that you maybe explore that a little bit more and explain what you mean by that. Yeah,
sure. Look, everybody would be aware of our, industry stats that suggest, something close to 80% of our potential audience don't access the services of a financial advisor. We also know that there are statistics in Australia that suggest large areas of the population are not confident about their ability to self-fund retirement. So I think there's potential around that inconsistency for our industry. Clearly, there are a lot of people that need our help that are not currently accessing our help. And I think the industry needs to, take a long, hard look at itself and understand why so many people don't engage with us.
Okay. I think, Jackie, if you're there, Mark sent through a little bit earlier, everybody, I guess, a traditional advice model, which we thought, I guess, to take from Carl Richards, the sketch guy, often it's easy to draw these things out as we explain them. So, Mark, would you perhaps like to talk through what this means?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the history of our industry and where it's come from. And I think that helps give us context in terms of why so many people don't access our services. It's possible that we're not being heard, but it's far more likely that what we have to offer isn't resonating with clients, either through experience, perception, or reputation. And I think that the traditional licensee models have really driven some of this behaviour, and I've tried to put it together in a sketch here. So often the bulk licensees have been product driven. They've used the licensee framework for distribution of their products. That basically has resulted in compliance issues. So a lot of the issues that we have seen in our industry are basically stemmed from the fact that licensees have been trying to push product through those channels. And then, of course, best interest duties, et cetera, are tested. So those compliance issues have essentially driven compliance-driven processes. Now, that's great to protect the licensee, but it actually delivers a poor client experience. So if we're product-centric and we have a poor client experience, we land up with an unattractive value proposition.
One of the things I know Mark and I have spoken about offline, everybody, is some of the things that we're capturing in fact finds. Mark, if perhaps you'd like to talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about those processes, I mean, essentially, again, with the licensee model, a lot of the technology and the advice models that are handed down by licensees are primarily to protect the license. They're not about your business or, more importantly, your clients. So that's where you have a disconnect. And I think that needs to be addressed as a primary before we can start to evolve as an industry. Now, we're kind of seeing some changes, and we've seen this sort of recent, the recent legislation around the education. Now, I don't actually think that that's great, but it will help with lowest common denominator advice models. And what I mean by that, if you're licensing 100 advisors, your compliance regime is aimed at the worst one of those 100 advisors. So the advisor that is more risky in terms of the advice that he delivers, he's the one that has to be controlled by the processes, which means that the other 99, regardless of how good or bad they are relative to that 100th person, are governed by the same processes and procedures. And that can lead to very restricted engagement with your clients because of the process that you're forced to follow.
Is it your sense, I suppose, speaking to business owners and the like, that we're starting to see, and without getting into an institution versus independent conversation, but are you starting to find that smaller business owners are starting to get frustrated by being stuck with a compliance process that's designed for the number of 100th advisor and 100th licensee? Are you sort of seeing that being a motivator for the independence wave?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, our own experience was exactly that. So, having shaken off a licensee that had that, multiple advisor model, we've been able to evolve what we do in terms of the way that we deliver advice to clients in a very dramatic way. Now, that doesn't mean that we're any less compliant. In fact, I would argue that we're significantly more compliant because when it comes to the Know Your Client regulations, I think we know a lot more about our clients through our process now than we ever did with a standard fact find that came out of our licensee, which is, as you very well know, constricted to the collection primarily of financial details. When I say we're leaving value on the table, the value that we're leaving on the table is all of the good stuff, so all of the value. So the reason that our industry is being disrupted at the moment, both by technology and legislators and regulations, is because of the history that we've had. So we've developed essentially a fairly lazy value proposition with admittedly high margins, which has been part of the problem because those high margins have not exactly been a driver for the incumbents in the industry to drive change. So the legislators have moved in. And the technology's moved in because they know that they can grab our lazy value propositions and they can look at those high margins, and both of those things are now forcing change upon our industry. So now we don't have a choice. We always had a choice. We chose not to take it, but now we're forced to have a choice because that traditional model just simply will not survive. And for you younger advisors out there, if you want an industry in 10 or 20 years' time, that traditional model is dead and buried. And if you follow that, you simply will not have a business.
To be, I suppose, devil's advocate, Phil and I were speaking offline, and I think this is something that probably resonates with a lot of advisors, and perhaps it's a good lead into the next slide that we're going to see. But if you're a young advisor and you're starting out and you get all that stuff and you actually do really want to help people and you understand I guess the importance of good, valuable, objectives-based planning, but you struggle to have a commercial business model through doing the right thing because, unfortunately, if you're in your late 20s, you just don't have those hundreds of thousands of dollars that can justify a percentage of funds under management, nor perhaps justify a $5,000 SOA fee. Would you have any comments for the younger advisors who perhaps understand and get that, but are struggling to make any money to survive for tomorrow?
Yeah, I do. I think there's some good news and I think there's some less good news. And we'll start with the less good news. I think that technology needs to evolve and tools need to evolve to support advisors that are trying to do their job in a different way. So the tools that we have in the industry clearly have been developed around that traditional model. So there are infinite tools that you can go to drive and support that model. And there are far less tools available to drive a modernised model, which we'll have a look at in a moment. But, technology and tools at some point will catch up, and, then we're going to be able to deliver scalable solutions to people that don't necessarily have funds under management. So, once again, anybody that's relying on revenue with a funds under management model at some point is going to be challenged around that. Probably seeing the beginnings of it. It's a long way. I think there's some distance to go with that one. So I don't think that that's a revenue stream that's threatened in the short term. But I think in the medium to long term, again, modern advice businesses, if they're looking forward 10, 15 years, they really need to start thinking that that's a revenue stream that will gradually become less important, and we will have to rely on revenue streams that are generated by other areas of advice. There's plenty of online investment solutions which don't need an advisor fee added to them to necessarily give a good outcome to the client. So I think that there are some challenges, but I don't think we should miss the fact that some of these traditional models have not been particularly scalable. So, we've got a lot of advisors out there that have been, trying to add value by running their own portfolios, have been trying to deliver bespoke portfolios to clients. Really difficult to scale a business like that. It's paperwork intensive, it's people intensive. So I think that, we will have the opportunity to put together some very lean business models going forward. And I think that, we need to think about what part AFSL plays in future businesses. I think that there will always be a requirement around that for some elements of advice and product-related advice. But I think we're going to be far less reliant on the AFSL framework to be giving and delivering really great lifestyle, more broad-based advice to our clients.
Kind of interested in the idea. Obviously, goals are sort of subjective in that, with an investment portfolio, you can pull them into 5 groups, and that's how you can perhaps talk to your clients. But with goals, it's literally each person, not even each household, each person within the household. So perhaps, Jackie, if we open up the next slide, I know Mark's got some views on how to create scalable, objectives-based advice models. I think we're looking at one side of it, so let's get
the whole picture, so we're not standing on our heads. But essentially, what we're going to see now is my view of, a modernised advice model, where we really do bring the client back to the centre. And if you bring the client back to the centre, you're going to create better engagement. And if every advisor that's kind of listening to this thinks about their own experiences, we all know very well that the goals the best goals that we kick are when we deliver lifestyle driven outcomes for our clients. It's really about a whoopee moment related to an investment success. It's much more where you've helped them with their lives. So if we start by collecting data that's values driven, so if we shift our focus from collecting merely financial data to values-driven data, we can have a process that's client-focused. And because that's client-focused, that in itself becomes more engaging for the person at the other end. So I'm kind of interested in running statistics at some point around a typical first meeting with an advisor and a new potential client. And my view, and again, this is a view that's supported by other advisors I've spoken to, we have a sense that the advisor does around 75% of the speaking in that first meeting. Now that can't be right, because when the client's leaving, that is not an experience that's been about them. It's been about the advisor or the advisor's business. So a values-driven process actually turns that on its head, and we can create a process that is 75% about the client and 25% about the advisor facilitating that discussion. And if you can put all that together, you land up with a very strong and attractive value proposition, because it's all about the client and their lives, and it's not about your licensee's compliance. But in essence, you've created a more compliant model because you know your client more thoroughly than you ever would through a traditional fact find.
I quite like the notion that we discussed previously about a traditional fact find, because of the litigious framework that we operate in under the traditional advice models, captures the assets, the liabilities, the income, the expenses, the insurances. So you've captured somebody's balance sheet and you've taken that out of the office and given it to client services. What you've actually left in the boardroom is the person. So you've kind of left, I guess, what this model picks up, which is who sits behind those numbers that the advisors collected.
Yeah, look, I think that you framed that very well, Ray. I mean, you do literally leave the person in the room. And I think that, again, that's why we lose potentially 80% of our audience, because the 20% maybe recognise that there's a specific issue that they need to have resolved, and that drives them into advice, such as the investment of money. But this is really all about helping clients make better financial decisions throughout their lives and capturing people at a younger age to help them have a more successful life, which is supported by finance, clearly, but it's not divorced from it. So just fixing the money side of things can be obviously a great assistance, and financial security is at the core of well-being, but there's an awful lot of other things that go into well-being. And if advisors can help clients around some of those other things, I think you just strengthen your value proposition dramatically. And sometimes this is outside of the AFSL framework. So, you know, when you go back to cost to serve, Ray, which is something that I think we're all struggling with to some extent, you know, because we're outside of that licensing framework, you know, there's the opportunity to deliver one-to-many, for example. And we're seeing some of those evolutions occurring in healthcare, where in the US there is now one-to-many solutions for healthcare, which is driving down the costs and is making that healthcare accessible to people that it otherwise would not have been accessible to.
How does that work?
Well, the healthcare model, I've not dived inside it particularly, but essentially, you know, you're putting, instead of having a one-on-one with a GP, for example, you're putting a GP in a room with 20 people. 19 or 20 of them would be interacting with technology, and the others would be consulting that GP one-on-one incidentally over a period of a couple of hours during that session. So, now that's evolving. It's something that's brand new, but it's something that we sent our operations, our head of operations over to the London School of Business recently. And as a business solution, this is something that multiple industries are looking at to reduce the cost to serve. And I think it's something that the financial services industry could learn a lot from. We can, now our industry's, not just our industry, but as a country, we've often failed at increasing financial literacy through the population for a variety of reasons. But I think that there is an opportunity to serve one-to-many until technology catches up, so that we can actually deliver financial literacy much more effectively using technology.
So Mark, just for everyone watching, there's questions going out in the chat box. We're going to put them to Mark after Ray and I finish drilling Mark on his ideas. So yeah, keep throwing out questions. But my question is, with that modernized advice model that you've got, how do we make it values driven, really personal, but you're also talking about one-to-many? Are they just diametrically opposed?
Look, I don't necessarily think I'm talking about the same thing when I mention one-to-many and values-based advice. I guess what I'm talking about is that there is a gap, as Ray mentioned. The cost to serve is an issue that the industry is facing at this point in time. You know, we're having to face probably increased costs, and we're having our revenue streams attacked by regulation. So those two things are having an impact in cost to serve. We've seen it play out in the UK, where a huge number of people dropped out of advice because of regulation forcing the cost to serve up significantly. And I'm suggesting that one-to-many might be a solution in the short term for that cost to serve issue. And I think it's something our industry should seriously look at. When we go back to the values-based advice, I think that at this point in time, I'm really talking about that as a one-on-one relationship, replacing the traditional advice model. I think that the two at some point, you know, will come together. But at this point, I'm really separating and splitting the atom there, Phil, and I'm saying, look, The traditional advice model is gone. If you're following that, it's going to die. The business is likely to die with it. So you need to evolve, and whether it's that modernised advice model that I've put together or something else that you've come up with in your own businesses, either way, that traditional advice model is redundant and it needs to be replaced. With a values-based model, you're just collecting or focusing on a different data set from the outset. So you're finding, I mean, you know, we have an obligation, as you know, to record pretty much in the client's own words what their key objectives are for going to see an advisor. That's a really difficult thing for a client to do sometimes. And, you know, you often see the kind of rabbit caught in the headlights when you pose that question in the traditional sense. So having a psych-based process which helps you help the client to explain what's important to them, both from financial aspect and also from a lifestyle aspect. If you can do that and help to free the wheels of that conversation, the data that you collect from that is very valuable. And if you think about your business, the most valuable thing in your business is usually your people. And the second most valuable thing in your business is the data that you collect. And the way that you then regurgitate and use that data to grow your business and create better experiences for your clients. And leaving value on the table is you leave all that good stuff. So I know advisors that have amazing conversations with their clients, but you look at what they've collected from the interview and it's just a bunch of facts about their superannuation and insurance. All the good stuff has gone, and it may or may not get revisited, but it's not being recorded and it's not being used to service that client. So a traditional review focuses on the investment piece, the insurances, superannuation, whatever it might be. The lifestyle piece has been completely left behind, and I think that that's a great shame. And I think that that's been a huge shortcoming in the advice industry, and I think it's one of the major reasons that the 80% are switched off from what we do.
Yeah, so for me, with the traditional advice model, because most people are licensed through vertically integrated licensees, do you think that can change, moving away from products when really, let's be honest, call a spade, the licensees who are owned by vertically integrated businesses, they are there to distribute products. They call the BDMs distributions. They call their advisors their distribution team, let's be honest. So how can we move away from this product focus when we've still got this vertical integration? Should we all be moving towards self-license like yourself?
Oh, look, I think that self-licensing is absolutely the way to go. I think the bulk licensing, we are seeing, you know, there are more modernised licensees that are shifting away from being product-centric. So when there are good licensees that are trying to do different things, and I'm kind of not saying that all licensees equal, you know, Mr. Evil, but a lot of them have been product centric. And whilst they remain product centric, it's really difficult to create a process that doesn't need compliance wrapped around it to kind of shrink that and protect the licensee from being sued because they're trying to distribute product. I think you do that by actually creating a service offering that changes where it's focused. So yeah, you're always going to need product solutions, but the product solutions really aren't the big deal. You know, a good investment service, a good robust investment service is not going to dictate the outcomes of the client over a period of time. You're going to do that by interacting with them and helping them make consistently better financial decisions over time. You're going to do that by helping a husband and wife interact more cohesively as a financial team, and maybe even stop a divorce that has not yet happened, you know, because of financial stress. That's a good outcome, you know. Try and calculate the financial return on the divorce that didn't happen, relative to marginal differences in investment returns, for example. So I think the product thing with a good advice model just shrinks so far into the background. Really doesn't matter which products you're using as long as they're satisfying that very small component of the client needs.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've got two more questions before we head over to the audience questions, and they're probably webinars in and of themselves. So let's try and keep it short. But given your modernised advice model, none of it talks about products, and we've discussed that products makes such an insignificant difference in the clients' lives. And given that the regulatory guides talk about SOAs as they're all product focused, providing SOAs, do you think the modernised advice model can move away from providing SOAs at scale to clients and therefore reducing significant costs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's very possible to industrialise the values-based process, which spits out something that is not necessarily a statement of advice. So if you are not requiring products or other advice solutions that require a statement of advice under AFSL, it will be possible to create a document that's highly valuable for a client. Even if they're tapping into other financial solutions, such as a robo-advisor for an investment piece, for example. So, rather than, we might, reframe that term, it's not really a robo-advisor, they're just using an internet provider of investment services. That might be an example. So yeah, I absolutely think that the atom will be split, and I think that there'll be convergence everywhere. So, accountants, for example, are facing the same pressures around transactional revenue that we are. They're going to have to move more into the advice world. So I think that there will be some convergence around coaching generally, but I think that advisors are really well placed to steal that space.
Yeah, I totally agree. The last question's around the cost and the 80% of Australians seeking advice. Do you believe that it's really the lack of advisors talking about the client's values that's stopping people from getting advice, or is it simply the cost? Like, people are throwing around $4,000, $5,000 for upfront SOAs when the average Australian saving $420 per month as a household. Like, we're talking about 10 months or 12 months worth of savings just to pay for that initial advice. So do you think it is advisors aren't talking clients' language, or do you think it's mainly down to the cost of advice?
Oh, look, I think it's both. The 20%, doesn't consist of the richest 20%. That 80-20 is not split along wealth lines. There's an element of that in there, absolutely, for sure, I understand that. But that's not the be-all and end-all of it. And there's certainly, people at the lower end of the socio-economic scale that are not going to access our services. So, we're not aiming at the 100% here, but 20% is a number that can be, I think, doubled or even trebled. And I think that the cost to serve does need to come down. So that definitely is an issue that we need to address. I think one-to-many and technology, there's no doubt that the future advisor is going to be servicing a whole lot more clients numerically than he does today. But that advisor might look very different from the AFSL-centric advisor that we see today. So, and technology needs to come in and help. I think the numbers being bandied about in the US is that the average advisor is going to have to service up to 800 clients, not only without any perceivable service degradation, but actually with service enhancement. So those are challenges that we all face, and we do need to rely on people in technology and fintech to help us reduce the cost to serve. And I'm really, when I sort of think about some of the younger Australians, I would love to be able to, get to them in their 20s and early 30s to stop some of the mistakes happening before it's too late and behaviour's been set, and all of those sorts of things. So we do need to find ways of doing that. And I think that, there is some opportunity around that one-to-many to think about how our industry can start to service using a slightly different business model, a business model that's evolved to reduce cost to serve.
Yeah, I don't even have 800 Facebook friends, let alone that I know intimately and I know their values. So that's...
Well, when your Facebook friends get into double figures, Phil, check back in.
That's right. Yeah, I'm just trying to get, above 10. So,
yeah, that's right, mate. I know. I keep my eye on it.
So we're going to head over to audience questions. Ray J, you start us off.
Yeah, cool. So I'll start at the top. Benjamin Martian asked the first question. Thank you, Benjamin. Asking about whether or not anyone's had luck getting licensees to be more open, improving fact-find documents to be more about client goals. And that kind of feeds into the second question from Ben Nash, who talks about the idea that it's actually a myth that clients won't pay for objective space. But he was interested in understanding how you, Mark, collect values-driven data. So I guess there's a two-in-one question for you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we have we've gradually evolved our fact find to include more lifestyle-based information, and the business has invested in bringing Salesforce as a CRM, which has much more functionality in its ability to collect that data and store it, and then regurgitate it in a way that we can report on and use that, you know, when we're servicing our clients. That's a challenge. Unfortunately, Salesforce is expensive to license, and it's also expensive to customize to the individual requirements of a business. And I think that, you know, again, as our industry evolves, we're going to see either licensees change the way that they bring together a service package for advisors, which has to be much more about providing advisors with a better set of tools to enable them to collect this data and then to actually, you know, be able to report on it, store it, and then use it in a different way. So the Treysta business now, for example, is able to use some personality profiling. So, you know, gone are the days where you segregate your database gold, silver, and bronze based on revenue that you collect. You know, God forbid, that's just ridiculously old school. There's no value in it. And if anybody's doing it, I would suggest that you have a look at that and think about some alternatives. But we now use some personas based in psychology, which means that we can use different language when we communicate to different sets of our clients. And I think that even smaller businesses can start to think about doing some of those things. You know, and gradually as technology does improve and as licensees start to provide better toolkits for their advisors, I think it's going to become easier. But for now, I would urge you to look at your data full, think about how you can collect and have more lifestyle values-based conversations, and don't leave it on a notepad or an iPad. You know, think about using the information that you've collected, think about how you can store it, and think about how you can use it to create a richer experience for the client.
Yeah, I think we had Vince Scully on. He's customized the Salesforce, and he said he dropped about $1 million into that customization. So maybe that's not the solution for everyone. Next question's from Mark Rottenstein. I'm going to use a bit of creative license here, but he said, the modernized advice model, you're living in fairyland, Mark, because that's all good and well to collect values. But as soon as we start talking products, we need to go through that same traditional advice model, hitting compliance barriers. So how do we do the modernized advice model, even though we still need to do product recommendations?
Yeah, I kind of understand why that criticism could be leveled at that modernized advice model. And at the end of the day, you know, there is no reason to get around the compliance aspect of product-related solutions when you're providing an advice piece. What I'm arguing is that it should not become the thing that dominates the conversation with the client, the thing that dominates the way that you engage with the client. So yeah, absolutely, you will always need, you know, that statement of advice and the compliance that surrounds that is going to be there, and that's not going to get any easier, and that's not going to be relaxed, at least in the foreseeable future. In fact, you know, it's likely to harden. So, you know, but what you have to do is just shrink it. You know, don't let it be the dominant thing. Don't let it be the thing that controls your business. You know, create product solutions, but, you know, it should be like less than 10% of the conversation. And that means that you can really condense the SOA back down to what ASIC always meant it to be. You know, it wasn't meant to be a 100-page document. You can thank your licensee's lawyers for that. It's got nothing to do with the regulators.
Thanks, Mark. Another one from Shane Mitchell. Keen on your thoughts. Any value in spending the upfront cost over 2 years to smooth it out? What are your thoughts on perhaps using that as a lowered barrier to entry?
Yeah, obviously you're running some business risk around that because, you've got cash flow issues, and B, you've got to manage, the ongoing collection of the fee. So you've got to make sure that you're providing a service which, means that client is going to be happy to pay that over that 2-year period. But yeah, I think it's one of many solutions that you can think about. So, what I'm asking advisors to do is really think about that cost to serve and think about creating scalable businesses to begin with. So, if you're running down rabbit holes of managing intricate cash flow, for example, and you're trying to deliver that as as a value proposition, well, think about how you're going to scale that. So, you might be able to deliver a great service to 10 or 15 or 20 clients, but will you be able to do that for 200 or 300 clients? And if you can't, don't run down that rabbit hole. So as you start to think about the way that you evolve your business model, always have one eye on scale, because cost to serve is going to be an ever increasing difficulty in our industry. We are going to have to provide our services at lower cost. And to do that, we need to have genuine scale within our businesses. So don't create complexity, because there's rarely any value in it. And if you can remove complexity and deliver genuine value with scale, you should have a future-proof business.
All right, next question is from James Millard. He said, do you think if we have a product-free, SOA-free business model, and we call it financial coaching, can we do that without any need of qualifications? So any Joe Blow can set up a business doing that?
Well, I'm not a compliance officer, so I'll put a caveat around it that anybody thinking about doing that should go and speak to somebody that specialises in that area. But on the face of it, I would say, yeah, absolutely. You can. One of the problems that you always drift into, of course, is that the moment you start having conversations that require financial solutions, without the license, you almost drift back into life coaching arena or business coaching arena. And I think that some of the shortfalls that life coaches and business coaches have had is their inability to provide solutions because they're not licensed, which is why I think, the modern advisor has a really great opportunity to go in and grab that space, because you can always have the AFSL in the background. What I'm saying is, if you've got a team of 3 or 4 advisors, all of whom are licensed in the current business models, the future business might have one advisor that has the AFSL license and other advisors that are operating outside of that environment that tap on that advisor as and when is needed. I think that that's much more likely to be the way advice businesses look in the future. The fact that you're not maintaining multiple licenses means that business model is likely to be more cost effective, which again comes back and helps with that cost to serve.
I think just before we wrap up, Phil, sorry to cut you off. I am sort of midway through a psychology coaching degree, and I think one of the things that I'm certainly learning in class is there's that fear that the term can be bastardized because there's no regulation around it. If any of you have gone to have a look for a business coach or a life coach or whatever it is, you're almost subjected to the vagaries of a great landing page on a website, and it's really difficult to find out before it's too late, because there is no regulation in terms of calling you even a counselor. That was something that I'd learned. Obviously, clinical psychology is a term that you can only call yourself if you've got the ticks and the certificates on the wall, but you can happily call yourself a counselor, and that's an unregulated thing as well. So I think there's perhaps a discussion, and yeah, this is something that we could talk about for hours, but I think there's perhaps a conversation around quality assurance in that space as well, and what that actually means and defining that.
Well, you can actually call yourself a financial advisor as well and not be qualified. So that's more directly in our industry. Guys, we've got plenty more questions, but we are going to have to wrap up here. We're going to take these questions to the Facebook page. So, Mark, I'm just going to make the presumption that you're going to jump and join in that Facebook group and answer some of those leftover questions when you've got the time. So thank you, everyone, for coming, and just wanted to thank AIA for supporting XY Live. If you are on Facebook, which I presume everyone is, join the Facebook group. There's amazing conversations happening every single day, every single hour, and the people are throwing out questions and getting answers from advisors and experts in the area. So I encourage you all to join that. And we will see you next week. We've got Steve Crawford joining us. And so it's going to be a great session. So I just want to thank you again, Mark, for sharing with us all your experience and knowledge.
Thank you, and good luck to everybody.
Thank you. And just before everybody goes, we are doing our XY Social in Sydney, 30th of March. So we've booked the venue for that in Sydney CBD, and we'll be starting to communicate to everybody what tickets and the like, and the content for the night. So yeah, look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.